Fives, Echo, Havoc, Blitz, all of these were memorable clone troopers with one major thing in common. They were all ARC troopers. But what exactly was an ARC trooper? The Advanced Recon Commando troopers were some of the toughest soldiers the Republic produced, both in canon and in Legends. However, their information surrounding them does change depending on Legends or canon. To start with canon information, the ARC trooper did not get a ton of dedicated lore. We know that they were both bred for the role and recruited from normal clone legions when certain clones shined under pressure and in battle. Unfortunately though, we are not fully aware of their training process. It is still canon that a number of ARC troopers also trained a number of the earliest clone commanders, though the full list is not canonized. Thankfully though, we do know a lot about what they actually used and wore in battle. ARC troopers had two distinct armor sets in canon, the first of which was known as the Phase 1 ARC trooper armor. This armor was built out of a similar material to the regular clone armor, but with a large array of upgrades. These included extra armor on the forearms, chest, and thighs, as well as enhanced comlinks built into the helmets. The helmet itself was more advanced and also sported a style that looked more like Phase 2 helmets of the regular clones, rather than the normal Phase 1 helmet of the clones. Though it is worth mentioning that some Phase 1 ARC trooper armor sets had a helmet that looked like the traditional Phase 1 clone helmet, though not much is known about this or why it was the case. Phase 1 armor also had pauldrons and commas that the ARC troopers wore. Additionally, the armor itself came with more upgrades, including a load-bearing harness and a survival pack. This was the primary and only armor of the ARC troopers until the Phase 2 was introduced. Being that the Phase 1 armor was essentially the prototype for the Phase 2 armor, there was not a wide range of changes between the two. Appearance and design-wise, the armor resembled traditional Phase 2 armor more than the Phase 1 armor, but kept many of the upgraded features that the Phase 1 ARC trooper armor already had. This included the survival pack, which we know had things like rations, water filtration systems, microfiber lines, and distress beacons, as well as the load-bearing harness, but it also had newer equipment like a comlink scrambler. Additionally, both phases of the armor could use breathing tubes as needed and jetpacks. The armory of the ARC troopers were vast as well, including almost every standard blaster of the Republic, including a number of specialized ones, including the DC-15X sniper rifle, as well as a large array of larger blasters and cannons like the Z6 rotary cannon and the reciprocating quad blaster cannons. Furthermore, the ARC trooper also had their own walker made for them later on in the war, known as the A.R.C, or the All-Terrain Force Reconnaissance Walker. Unfortunately, the amount of missions we know about in canon for ARC troopers is relatively small, and mostly only consists of the missions of Echo and Fives. However, within canon, we know about 8 dedicated ARC troopers, those being Jesse, Fives, and Echo, all in the 501st, as well as Blitz, Colt, Havoc, and Hammer, all of which were from the Rancor Battalion. Now, Captain Rex as well as a number of clone commandos did receive ARC trooper training in canon. However, this does not mean they were actually ARC troopers, and sources are often conflicting about whether they were ARC troopers as well as commanders or just commanders with ARC trooper training. Now you may be wondering, who is this 8th ARC trooper? Well, there is one more canon ARC trooper, but his sources are very wishy-washy. ARC trooper Muzzle was first introduced in Star Wars media as a Legends character, specifically Alpha ARC 66, a Legends variant of the ARC troopers. However, he was recently re-canonized as an ARC trooper who deserted from the Republic, though dropping his Alpha ARC status. However, this leads into the ARC troopers of Legends, who are honestly a whole different beast. The origins of the ARC troopers in Legends stems from Jango Fett and the rest of the advisory for the new army seeking to create clones that were better suited for secret missions. This led to the Kaminoans enhancing the original genes of Fett instead of restricting them. Their first batch of these clones were created and named the Null ARCs. Originally, there were 12 that were attempted to be made, but only 6 actually incubated and were born. However, these 6 were so independent, they were ultimately deemed as failures. However, just before their termination, they were saved by Cal Scarada, one of the Kaival Dar, who took them in as his own children and personally trained them all. Null ARCs were really their own breeds of beasts, and honestly were some of the scariest clones in the entire Republic military. Genetically, they were more advanced than any other clone, with heightened intelligence, perception, and memory allowing for an eidetic memory. They were so much more intelligent, they actually scored 35% higher than any other commando unit. The enhancements were not just in their mind either, they were also faster, stronger, and heavier built than other clone troopers as well. The Nulls did not go through training similar to any other clones either. They were flash trained at a much younger age than other clones and were in live fire environment training by the age of 2. Also, their training was much more intense, going as far as torture training. This was also because Cal wanted them to be trained as Black Ops commandos, so their training extended to assassinations, Black Ops, covert ops, slicing, medicine, spying, and anti-terrorism. And that was just the mission types that they were trained in. They were also trained in all kinds of combat with all kinds of weapons, and culturally they were well versed in the Mandalorian ways. The 6 Null Arcs were Lieutenant Prudy or Null 5, Lieutenant Cormac or Null 6, Lieutenant Muriel, Null 7, Lieutenant Jang, Null 10, Captain Ordo, Null 11, and Sergeant Aden, Null 12. Though it's worth noting that Cal did take the time to name all 12 of the Nulls, even the 6 that did not make it. Because of these intense training, the Nulls were sent out on a wide range of secret missions, with the most notable, in my opinion, being the fact that they were the ones who actually located Grievous on Utapau. However, in many eyes, the Nulls did have one disadvantage. Their extreme loyalty and independence led to them being extremely loyal not to the Republic, but only to Cal. So the Kaminoans did seek to correct these issues with a new batch of ARC troopers. This batch was known as the Alpha Arcs, and they created 100 of them. The Alpha Arcs were similar to the Nulls, minus the mental enhancements of them and the extreme loyalty to Cal. Rather, they made their extreme loyalty to the Republic. Nonetheless, they were still very independent and were meant to be one-man armies. They were sent through a normal round of flash training, but once this was completed, they were personally placed under Jango Fett for the remainder of their training. This helped bring out their independence as well as train their fighting capabilities and really make them copies of Jango Fett himself. However, once their training was complete, the Alpha Arcs were actually frozen in stasis and left on Kamino till they were needed. However, this did not last long because only 2 months after the Battle of Geonosis they were activated when Kamino was attacked. Following their activation, they would go on a number of missions throughout the galaxy and still served in a commando position, though some troopers helped train other clones like Alpha Arc 17, who created the ARC Trooper training program. Now this is the training program that trained many of the clone commanders we know and love in ARC Trooper tactics. The ARC Troopers of Legends wore armor that was more like Phase 1 armor of the normal clones. However, it was much more versatile and highly advanced compared to the normal Phase 1 armor. Also, both the Nulls and the Alphas had an extremely wide range of weapons and equipment at their disposal. Now, we roughly know about 39 of the 100 Alpha ARC Troopers, with some of the most notable being Captain Fordo, or Alpha 77, Alpha 17, who simply went by Alpha, or Alpha 26, known as Maze. In Legends, not much is known about the ARC Troopers who were neither an Alpha or a Null Arc, but rather trained into the position. This is because prior to the Clone Wars series, this was not a thing, and the closest thing that we had was the training program that trained clones like Gree, Apo, Fox, Bakara, Cody, Thyre, Bly, Neo, Rex, and Keller. But even Rex was a later attachment to this list. The training program created by Alpha 17 was later the basis for the clones being trained into ARC Trooper roles in canon, minus the idea that it was created and led by Alpha 17 because the Alpha Arcs were no longer a thing. However, in Legends, the Null Arcs all deserted the Republic at the rise of the Empire, while the Alpha Arcs were given the choice of retirement or training stormtroopers, though a number still did desert. Obviously, in Legends, the ARC Troopers are much stronger and truly some of the strongest and scariest clones in the Republic. Regardless of canon or Legends though, the ARC Troopers stand as some of the best and coolest troopers in all of the Republic. Let me know down below which ARC Trooper is your favorite, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you did and want to see more.